This is Danielle Walker doing chemistry experiment number 4, the qualitative anion test. Um, this experiment deals with the qualitative analysis, which aids in the identification of chemical substances. And the experiment will also allow students to identify common anions by way of selected precipitation reactions that help differentiate the ions. It is reasonable to assume that the anions will react differently under the influence of various chemicals, thereby allowing the student to classify similar reactions into groups and identify anions. The experiment required the use of household bleach, distilled water, toothpicks. We used the beaker, cylinders, and also some test tubes, which we held in the well plate. The chemicals that we used were ammonium, I can't say that, aqueous ammonia, barium chloride, hydrochloric acid, nitric acid, organic reagent, silver nitrate, sodium bromide, sodium carbonate, sodium chloride, sodium iodide, sodium phosphate, sodium sulfate, and sodium sulfide, and we also used an unknown substance. The experiment also required that we use lead acetate strips. The discussion and review portion of this experiment states that in group 1, the anions that will not, or it asks us, which anions will not precipitate in the presence of silver nitrate. Group 2 wants to know which anions will precipitate in the presence of silver nitrate and the resulting precipitates, I can't say that, will dissolve upon acidification with nitric acid. In group 3, anions will precipitate in the presence of silver nitrate, and the resolving precipitates will not dissolve.
What do you say? I'm not putting it on the glass for you.
Will not dissolve upon acidification with nitric acid. Oh, that's horrible. Okay, so then, a brief synopsis of the procedure. The first test tube, we put 8 drops of the anion to be tested, which was hydrochloric acid. Oh, I'm sorry, we added 8 drops of hydrochloric acid to that solution. The second test tube, we put 8 drops of the anion solution and then added 3 drops of silver nitrate to that. In the third test tube, required us to place the beaker into hot tap water for a few minutes to see how that affected the experiment. Let's see here. We continue doing various mixtures of the chemicals in each test tube. And then we thoroughly cleaned and dried our test tubes and placed them back in the proper containers. 4 minutes and 38 seconds.
Last few.
The observations that we made after performing the experiment in test tube 1, which had the HCl, the bromide had no change, the carbonate produced some gas, the chloride had no change. Iodine, phosphate, sulfate, sulfide, and the unknown substance all had no change as well. In test tube 2 with the AgNO3, the bromide, carbonate, chloride, and iodine, phosphate, sulfate, sulfide, they all had precipitate. The iodine and phosphate actually formed some color, and but the unknown substance had no precipitate. The test tube with the HNO3, the bromide, chloride, iodine, and sulfide did not dissolve. However, the carbonates, phosphate, and sulfate did dissolve. So from that, we determined that the anions that would not precipitate in the presence of silver nitrate were bromide and the unknown substance, and the anions that will precipitate in the presence of silver nitrate and the resulting precipitates will dissolve upon acidification with nitric acid are carbonate, phosphate, and sulfate. And then in the third group, the anions that will participate in the presence of silver nitrate and the resulting precipitates will not dissolve upon acidification with nitric acid are bromide and sulfate chloride. Oh gosh, I'm over. Way over.